integrated with everybody else. And that was during the time when the first song that the band would play and the folks would stand up and sing was Dixie. Now obviously, everybody else stood up, but this black one just stayed right where he was, you see. Then when of course the national anthem was played, then I would stand up, all right? At this same game, I heard something that really intrigued me, and it was good that I heard it this way. There was a young black student from Greensboro, North Carolina, from Dudley High School in Greensboro, North Carolina, who was playing football for one of the Big Ten teams. I think it was Michigan or Michigan State. And he was an outstanding football player, Big Ten, right here from North Carolina. And I heard these two men in their southern twang talking about this. Now here they're in, I think they're in front of me, and maybe behind. Anyway, they're looking at the game. And Carolina wasn't having too good a year that year, and this is the conversation they went on. He said, "You know what? Given our situation here, we need to figure out a way to keep some of our black boys in North Carolina." Ooh, listen to this. See, it takes a football game to convince them that if we want to be good in football, we better figure out a way to admit some black students to this university who can play football. Hallelujah. That's where things eventually got to.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, if you read the things now that are being said about university athletics, and collegiate football, and the way African American athletes are treated and so on,
That's right.
it's come along, it's come around quite a ways. So how many black students were in the school or in the university then? Do you have any idea?
I don't know.
Were you often the only two African American
We
classes?
were the only two in our classes, and obviously in public health. We went to in public health, and in classes that we would take in other areas, we were the only two. What we had to be conscious of, and Bill and I used to talk about this quite often. You run into those, you get in some courses where you run into professional students. We call them professional students. You know what kind of students we're talking about when we say professional students? Let me see if we have the same definition. A professional student is so good that he or she, and most of them are he, they're going to make certain that they do everything they can to make an A. Okay? They know exactly what to study, what not to study. But if they don't, if they see that their grades are going down, they're not going to make that A, they know exactly when to get out of that course. And they would use that process to get in and out of courses until they got to a point where they knew that they could ace it. And so that when your final grade showed up, it showed up straight A's rather than X number of A's, and X number of B's, and X number of C's. And here we are now. We got to figure out how to pass this course, and we got some students in there who've been in these courses 2 or 3 times. Professional students working to figure out a way to get an A, because they could always drop out as long as they stayed within the framework of the rules and regulations. You can do it. So we run into some of those kinds of students, and they could make life pretty difficult in terms of grade pattern. But we soon got through that.
So you must have taken Epidemiology 160. is that right? You had a required epidemiology course?
At the master's level.
No, not the doctoral.
Not the doctoral.
Oh, so you didn't have to take epidemiology. Who taught it you don't remember who taught it at Central, do you?
Central, I remember Dr. Larsh. Am I pronouncing it right?
Yes, John Larsh.
John Larsh.
He taught epidemiology.
Yeah, at Central. Bertie Greenberg taught about that.
And John Castle
Castle, was Castle here then? I don't think Castle.
Yeah, no, John
Yeah.
Castle was here in the
He's
60s.
Is that
just
right?
come back.
And he
yeah.
was
Is that
teaching
right?
epidemiology, but I don't know if he taught at Central. I don't know if he
I
was
don't
one of
know.
the people.
I don't remember Castle at Central,
Okay.
but I remember Larsh at Central.
So you got your doctoral degree, and then you went back to the Pennsylvania State Health Department.
Right.
But then you jumped ship and went to academia.
Well, yeah. When I went back to the Pennsylvania State Health Department, I was what they call, I think my title was health education specialist. And then I became a section chief. The department was organized in terms of a secretary of health at the top and deputy secretary. And then you had a bureau level and a division level down to section level, okay? And so after being a consultant and being assigned to chronic disease division most of the time, I did reach the section level where I became section chief in health education. And I know I was the first of this kind to be in that position. And at the next level up, which is the division level, that job became available. So I applied, took the civil service exams, etc., and I became director of the Division of Public Health Education. I haven't tested it, but I was either the first or close to being the first to ever be at that level in a state health department, in health education. Now the next level up is bureau. And that's only one step down from the secretary, it's the top position. And the bureau director was getting ready to leave, and I expressed an interest in applying for that job. But the reply that came back to me was that the Secretary of Health said, my God, isn't he satisfied where he is now? Which means I was getting too close to him. So that's life now, okay? So I said, all right, Pennsylvania, see ya. That's when I had the opportunity to join you folks in the academic world. And I took a position at School of Public Health, University of Minnesota. And it was a good 2-year position. Enjoyed it. I could have been there longer, but I don't want to put everything on the weather, but
We do have that advantage, though. But you didn't come back here, though.
no, I didn't. So I decided then, I had the opportunity, and I was asked to consider a position at Pennsylvania State University. They had just established a new College of Human Development. And in it, they had a health program, and they had a number of other individual and family studies. They were looking at the human being in all kinds of ways, and it was a very good school. And they needed an associate dean in continuing education, so I could use my background in terms of reaching out to work with more non-traditional students and with communities. And so I took that role as associate dean for continuing education at Penn State. Stayed there a number of years. And then I decided, well, I'll make one more trip, one more change. I decided I want to go back home in terms of historically black institutions. So I took a job at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore as vice president of academic affairs. And that's where I spent the last 10 years of my career there. And it was a good 10 years. We did a lot of work. We did our best to upgrade that small historically black university in a number of ways. And it was a good experience. It worked out quite well. And so that's my career.
So in terms of our time, we have about 20 minutes or a few more left, and I want to leave some time for your questions. But, and Dr. Ellis' CV is in Sakai, so you can read about some of the other things he's done. Like he's had a whole career in the American Public Health Association of various positions that he's held. But he also has had a career in the accrediting bodies. In the Middle States Accreditation Association, and he was actually president of it. And I thought it would be very interesting to hear some of his experience and perspective about trying to help bring diversity to academic institutions from the perspective of being an accreditor. Mm-hmm. So maybe I'll invite you to talk about that and then let everybody ask questions.
All right. Good. I did have the opportunity, as indicated, to work with Middle States Association. And my first contact was as a member of an accrediting team that went to State University of New York at Buffalo. And this happened back in October of 1972. And it was a very, very good experience. And then I had another opportunity to be with the team that evaluated the State University of New York at Stony Brook. And then soon after that, 74, the National Graduate University in Washington, D.C. Then I had my first chairmanship when University College, University of Maryland, College Park, Maryland. Now, the University College at the University of Maryland was really a worldwide program. And we had the opportunity to visit a couple of sites, one in Germany and one in England, as a part of that circuit, part of that accreditation. Then I kind of changed course because one of the things that I was running into or was being brought to my attention dealt with how some of the accrediting teams were looking at and dealing with historically black institutions. As a tendency for an accrediting team to forget its mission with respect to studying an accrediting institution and focus more on the concept that I come from a great university, therefore you need to be like us, and since you are not like us, we want to have some questions about your accreditation. And that was a critical issue. So I said, from now on, I want to chair as many teams as I can going to historically black colleges. And I wanted to use it as a training ground for all accreditors, people who own these accrediting teams, in terms of what accreditation is all about. Accreditation is not about basing UNC at Chapel Hill on the same basis as you looked at Duke in Durham or any other institution. Accreditation is about whether or not an institution has appropriately designed and set forth its goals and objectives and has the resources to meet those goals and objectives and is successful in doing so, not on the basis of whether or not it's like Chapel Hill or it's like NYU or it's like Harvard. No, that's not accreditation. There are certain standards that you set. You have to make certain that those standards are met. But each institution's standards are met on the basis of what that institution is designed to do and how it's moving. And the question always remains, are they meeting their goals and objectives? Do they have the funds and the facilities to do that? Do they have the faculty with the credentials to help them do that? Not on whether or not it looks like what's over here or what's over there. And it took a little doing to do this. And so that's why you see my name as chair of Morgan State University, Howard University, University of the District of Columbia, University of Maryland Eastern Shore, College of Virgin Islands, and Delaware State College. They're all historically black institutions. And I love historically black institutions. I love UNC too. But let's deal with it in terms of the basic concepts of accreditation. And that's because I've seen too many instances where faculty get to arguing among themselves as to whether or not what I'm doing at Yale is better than what you're doing at Harvard, and therefore you here at UMS, you should be doing ABC, that. And it was a fascinating experience. I loved it.
So let me give everyone a chance to ask questions, including Bill. Bill, I'm sorry, I kind of didn't give you a chance to ask
No,
questions.
don't mind me.
But anybody care to ask a question?
Now, I know you have questions because I saw you.
I hope so, because if there's one thing we've been trying to do is the questions are more important than the answers, and so I hope they've been thinking about questions, because that's what they're supposed to be doing here.
I always am. Thank you so much for sharing some of your stories, and I'm just curious, I'm just curious, what were some of your favorite things that you did as a health educator? I think you're probably doing that at a really interesting time, and Lucy Morgan sounds like a really inspiring person. We hear about her pretty often, and so I'm just curious what you enjoyed.
One of the projects I had as a health educator in Pennsylvania, and this occurred at the time when seat belts first came out. And we were interested in safety. And at that time, the seat belts were not a part of the automobile. You had to purchase them separately and then have them put into your car. And it was fascinating, and this was in Pennsylvania, where we decided to do a public education program on the use of seat belts for the safety of the public. And Sears Roebuck said, okay, if you provide the space for these educational programs, we'll install seat belts on the cars of those who are interested when they completed your program. Fascinating and highly successful. Now, I didn't go into health education thinking that I'd be helping see a robot. But here was a public safety issue that required that kind of an approach, and it worked. It worked. Have I dealt with all of that, or just some other?
Oh, yeah, I was just curious about some of your experience.
So you worked on TB in Washington D.C.
Yeah,
And you also worked specifically in Southwest Washington, which was, one of the more famous ghettos in American history.
Okay.
So could you tell us a little bit about your experience in Southwest Washington?
Okay.
And just in case you don't know, it was so bad till they leveled the whole place and started all over. But go ahead, I'm sorry.
This was when I was with the Tuberculosis Association, and the city had a great health center in Southwest Washington, which was historically black neighborhood. And we worked very closely with the staff at that center in providing opportunities for the community with respect to all kinds of health issues. Our major concern as a tuberculosis association was to really stamp out tuberculosis, which meant having people take advantage of chest x-ray programs that we provided. And so we would always have mobile units available at that center for this to occur. We also said, well, there may be some other issues in the community that we need to focus on that's more important to XYZ folks, but then while they're here dealing with that, we can talk to them about tuberculosis. And so we used to conduct all kinds of educational programs in that Southeast Health Center for the black community in that center. As you said, it was eventually, that community was eventually wiped out, but that was a magnificent center that they had there, well used. I remember, just a little personal family note, my daughter, again, she was maybe 4 or 5 years old, and I had a meeting at Southwest Center to talk to a community group. And I think my wife had another appointment. She couldn't take me, so I took the daughter to the meeting with me. And so she's sitting in the back, and I'm up front going through my spiel with the group. And all of a sudden, I hear some snickers. And my daughter, who was on the back seat, she had a big hat. She had this kind of hats that you just come over like this and you pull it up off your head, She had taken that hat off of her head, and she was holding it in one hand and had a foot in the other one, pushed it down in the other one, and the folks were going crazy. I said, "Oh, how am I going to get through this?" So I just gently went back. Well, we finally got through that. I just rolled it aside. But Southwest Washington, our primary focus was really, as a tuberculosis association, getting people. Just and we worked a lot with ministers. I think I remember telling you that, in Washington, the Ministerial Alliance would meet every Monday, of course it's the day after Sunday, and they would have their business, and they would also have a preacher, one of their preachers, a colleague, preach to them. See, now they've been preaching on Sunday, so now somebody go preach to them. And the best preaching in the world is when the preacher's preaching to preachers.
Mhm.
You see?
Mhm.
And I used to go to that because we worked very closely with the churches. I think we worked with just about every black church in Washington, D.C. with respect to encouraging chest x-rays and doing what we could do to be helpful to.
You know, on Tuesday, the focus of the class was on the impact of housing, environment on health. Southwest Washington was the perfect environment for TB in terms of housing and infrastructure. You know, did the issue of housing or, you know, how the living conditions, was that a part of the activities of the health center, or how did they deal with that?
I'm not sure that was a part of the activity
Okay.
at that time. In my recollection, mostly it was on traditional health kinds of things.
Okay.
And there may have been a missed opportunity.
Yeah. Right.
And if I can envision that if things had gone the other way, there would have been a little difficulty in just wiping out that community and putting up all those
That's
federal
true.
buildings out
That's
there.
true. Yeah.
But that community was not stable enough to survive
Mm-hmm.
what was coming after.
Right, yeah.
the feds, you see.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
It'd be hard to resist the federal government also, I think,
Yeah.
even for a strong community.
Yeah.
So you were saying earlier about how your mom told you that education was incredibly important. And it seems like back then, education was what you strived for. It was important, you had something to prove. But now it seems like in some communities, education, being intelligent just isn't desirable, especially among young teenage people. So I'm just wondering how we can develop some public health education program that would, again, push the importance of education and going to college, especially for young black men.
It's a good point. You've made a good point. Now, let me see if I can just elaborate on it. Off the top of my mind, off of my head, I can't recall now in 1, 2, 3 order exactly what you need to do. You know? But it does say something to us about the role of education, whether it's public health education or whether it's just traditional education, in the community in terms of dealing with these issues in our community. And I don't see why it is that our health agencies can't play a leadership role in this respect. What's the World Health Organization's definition of health? Complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease. That's the concept that we need to figure out a way of designing programs and efforts to deal with that, so that we can get to the kind of issue that you raised. Good point. Good. Yes.
Do you think that, you mentioned that you had a master's in your pocket, but you were working in sort of low jobs. Do you feel that that has influenced kind of the perception of education to some people, in the sense that they feel that it's not worth it, even you can get all the degrees, but you're still not going to get hired, you're still going to be in a situation. So do you think maybe education has gone up and down, meaning like get the education, but people who got the education are not doing well, and then people in the community see that, and they sort of like, what's the point?
I think that could happen to some, but if you expend that kind of energy, money, time into it, we need to figure out a way to help people get through those moments when they want to do just something else rather than continue with that. The education, I guess what I'm trying to say, how how do you get somebody to a point where they don't think that way? And what kinds of programs could we design to move us in that direction? Huh?
So you gotta get them early.
Get them early?
We have to get them earlier. We saw in a video last week, just talking about
Okay.
like what you say to a child, not what you say to a child at a young, actually that was a different discussion, what you say to a child at a young age can influence how they think and view life, and but also like early childhood education is very important to determine what they're going to do in the future.
That's right, yeah. Mhm.
Now, this came up upstairs when we were talking also toward the end, and what do you think are some of the reasons that young people today have a different outlook than young people when you were growing up? Certainly, there were a lot of constraints and restraints and limitations on what you all could do and on the kind of educational opportunities that were available and so on, but it seems that, and ironically, integration may have had something to do with this, that there was more of a community in those days where people could support each other. And with integration, there's been the out-migration of some of the people. There's been the whites now can kind of come in and do more in a sense. And so the community, I wonder, is that a possible reason that there's so many young people who are not able to connect or don't feel that there's actually a future for them?
I don't know. And a lot of it revolves around, at least some of it, rather, whether or not we can even give thought to how best to overcome this in our communities. And I don't know, maybe there's a need for more mamas to say to sons and daughters, give the kind of message I got. I don't know. I don't know. I'm trying to think of how you design a program with all of its fancy goals and objectives to deal with this particular issue, when a lot of it is so ingrained in our basic family structures that we have to figure out a way to get into and deal with. I don't know.
My personal opinion, I think experience is what makes it different. Your experience in the Navy allows you to focus on health. My first job was to register people to vote in South Carolina. That experience made me passionate about things like civil rights, whereas I would have probably come up not particularly socially motivated at all, and I think experience makes a difference. And so developing programs where, the other thing about integration is that, young black people, men and young women, had an opportunity to get experiences in different environments because they had institutions which provided those experiences within the black community. Once integration came, the experiences were in other institutions where they stood less of a chance to have those kinds of personal experience. For me personally, I think it's experience. It's important. But you had a question also?
I do have a question. What advice would you give to HBCUs on connecting to resources or connecting their education with the tangible outcome of eliminating health disparities? Considering basically
Eliminating health
disparities or inequities, right? Considering you don't have to be in the field of public health to do public health work.
What would I give?
What advice?
What advice would I give?
Right. In just general, I know all HBCUs are different. We can't necessarily group them together saying it's the same, but what advice would you give?
One piece of advice I'd give to HBCU is the fact that let's pay some attention to those letters in the phrase HBCU, historically black country, and let's go back to our roots and here again, let's not try to be a Chapel Hill, but let's be who we are, knowing who we serve and what their needs are. And we've got to make certain that we know what those needs are, and that we, in fact, move to deal with them in the black community. Some HBCUs get to the point where, and here again, accreditation is one of the factors, but I've got to do A, B, and C. No, you can do X, Y, and Z and stay in the black community and work at it. Well, it's not how many PhDs come out of there, it's how many finish high school and then go on to college. And then do whatever they can do to live a normal and productive life. That's really, and it's going to require some basic changes in how we think and deal with issues that are important to the black community.
Amen.
Thank you.
Now there's another thought that came to my mind. Let me see if I can resurrect it. I don't want to think it. The family structure is important. We recognize family structure. Family structure includes a mama, daddy, and kids, right? And several kids. Sometimes that family structure can get out of hand. We have too many kids. So does this say that birth control may be a factor? But the thing that really gets me about that family structure is that there is no family, but yet there are kids. How many mamas